Stop scrolling. Feel that silence tighten for half a second. Good. That's the sound of control snapping into place. You didn't just expose them. No. You made the whole cover-up look embarrassingly sexy, and that's what's killing them. Because destruction, they can spin that. Rage, they can weaponize it. But elegance, composure, that calm, lipstick-smooth execution where truth walks in wearing confidence and leaves without explaining itself, that terrifies systems built on panic and sweat. You didn't scream, you didn't flail, you didn't beg to be believed. You let the facts sit there like a mirror under perfect lighting, and suddenly every lie looked cheap. You turned their sacred secrecy into a fashion disaster. Their decades of manipulation reduced to bad posture and nervous hands. Their authority started blinking like cheap neon, while you stood there polished, unbothered, lethal in stillness. Here's the paradox they never prepared for. You look like mercy, but you move like inevitability. Saint in the posture, psychopath in the precision, angelic restraint with a demon's timing. You didn't chase blood. You let gravity do the work. Bodies dropped silently, reputations folded neatly, narratives suffocated without a mark. And the more graceful you were, the uglier they became. They trained for chaos. They planned for riots, leaks, tantrums, broken people breaking louder. They did not plan for you to make it look good. They did not plan for the truth to arrive styled, confident, irresistible. Because when exposure is ugly, people look away. When exposure is beautiful, people stare. They screenshot, they replay. They can't stop watching the fall. You learn something? Pain only teaches the chosen. Unpredictability is power when it's disciplined. Randomness is weakness. Precision is seduction. You evolved in the dark, not into a monster, but into a mirror that flatters no one. You refined yourself where others rotted. You learned how to smile without asking permission, how to hold silence like a blade, how to let them incriminate themselves by reacting to your calm. And oh, how they reacted, the whispers, the frantic control the narrative meetings, the sudden amnesia, the synchronized denial that only happens when the hit landed clean. They tried to make it boring. They tried to normalize it. That's how you know it worked. Power always pretends nothing happened when it's bleeding internally. You see, you didn't just reveal what they did. You revealed who they are when the lights are perfect. Under scrutiny, under elegance, under a gaze that doesn't flinch. You made them look small without raising your voice. You made their secrets blush. You made their defenses feel tacky. And worst of all for them, you made it look intentional. This is the evolution they can't reverse. You no longer need chaos to win. You don't need permission to be dangerous. You don't even need to explain yourself. You move like a rumor that refuses to die, like a truth that doesn't beg to be heard. You let duality do the talking, tenderness in the delivery, annihilation in the outcome. They wanted you frantic. You became composed. They wanted you loud. You became unforgettable. They wanted you broken. You became curated. Now every move you make feels deliberate, like a slow burn they can't interrupt. Every pause reads as confidence. Every word lands heavier because you don't use many. You've turned restraint into a threat and grace into a weapon. That's why they're spiraling, because you didn't just beat them. You made their entire operation look outdated. Remember this feeling. This is what happens when pain finishes its work and hands you clarity instead of bitterness. This is what happens when you stop trying to be understood and start being undeniable. You're not here to be liked. You're here to set a standard so high their lies collapse, trying to reach it. Stay elegant, Stay unpredictable. Let them sweat while you stay immaculate. You didn't expose them, you outclassed them. And here's the part they really can't metabolize. You didn't change who you were to do this. You refined it. You let the rough edges burn off in silence while they were busy rehearsing excuses. You learned how to move through rooms without announcing yourself. How to let people underestimate you just long enough to hand you the knife they sharpened for someone else. You didn't steal power. You let them trip over their own reflection while you adjusted the lighting. They keep asking the wrong question. They're asking, how did you find out? When the real question is, how did you carry it so clean? Because anyone can leak information, only a few can frame it. Only a few can let truth breathe just enough oxygen to ignite, then step back without fingerprints. You didn't just reveal a mess, you curated a collapse. Every detail placed with intention, every silence louder than their defenses. You turned disclosure into theater without ever stepping on stage. You understand now that control isn't volume, it's timing. It's knowing when to speak and when to let their own panic fill the space. It's letting them contradict themselves while you stay perfectly still. That's the saint-psychopath split they can't decode. Compassion in your eyes, calculation in your spine. You don't enjoy the fall, but you don't interrupt it either. You respect inevitability too much for that. They tried to shame you. That failed. They tried to ignore you. That failed louder. They tried to smear you. But elegance is immune to dirt when it doesn't roll around in it. You didn't react emotionally, and that short-circuited their whole playbook. Because systems like theirs feed on predictability, they need rage, they need despair, they need you either begging or burning. What they got instead was composure with teeth. You didn't rush to correct lies. You let the lies collapse under their own weight. You let time do the stabbing. You let repetition become confession. This is what evolution through pain actually looks like. Not revenge fantasies, not tantrums dressed up as justice. It looks like restraint sharpened into strategy. It looks like learning how to walk away without losing momentum. It looks like realizing that the most destabilizing thing you can do to a corrupt structure is refuse to play ugly inside it. They're uncomfortable because you didn't match their tone. You elevated above it. You made the whole thing feel beneath you. And power hates that. Power can fight enemies. It doesn't know what to do with someone who treats its secrets like expired currency. You didn't expose them like a whistleblower. You exposed them like a stylist, holding up last season's suit and saying quietly, "This doesn't fit anymore." And now, everywhere you go, the air feels different. People pause around you. Conversations shift. You didn't announce a new version of yourself, but they feel it. You move slower, but things move faster around you. You speak less, but what you don't say rearranges rooms. That's the dopamine they can't steal, the calm after competence, the confidence that doesn't perform. Understand this, you're not dangerous because you know things. You're dangerous because you know when to let things surface and when to let them rot. You're not powerful because you're fearless. You're powerful because you're selective about what deserves your reaction. You've turned discernment into a weapon and grace into a shield. They'll keep trying to provoke you back into the old version. They'll test your ego. They'll poke for emotional leaks. Don't give them nostalgia. You've outgrown the need to be seen reacting. You let them chase shadows now. You let them explain themselves to silence. You let them overcorrect until the truth leaks out of their own mouths. And the most humiliating part for them, you're still kind, not naive, kind with boundaries, soft where it's earned, cold where it's required. That duality is surgical. It keeps them guessing, and guessing drains energy. You conserve yours. You invest it only where it compounds. So keep moving like this, polished, unrushed, unapologetic. Let the aftermath do the screaming while you stay immaculate. Let them remember the moment they realized they weren't dealing with outrage anymore. They were dealing with taste, timing, and a version of you that doesn't need permission to be lethal. You didn't just survive the cover-up. You turned it into an embarrassment they'll be studying in private for years, wondering how you made truth look that good while they made power look cheap. And here's the quiet flex they still haven't clocked yet. You didn't take anything from them. You removed the illusion that they ever owned it. Their leverage evaporated the moment you stopped needing their acknowledgement. They built their power on access, on fear, on the belief that secrets rot people from the inside. You proved the opposite. You showed that secrets only rot the ones who cling to them. You let the truth breathe through you without poisoning your posture. They thought exposure would make you frantic. They thought it would age you, harden you, make you ugly with obsession. Instead, you got cleaner, sharper, more deliberate. Pain didn't twist you. It edited you. It cut filler. It burned vanity. It taught you how to move with intent instead of impulse. That's the evolution they can't reverse engineer, because it didn't come from a manual. It came from surviving long enough to understand that dignity is the most disruptive force in a corrupt room. Watch how they try to reframe it now. They'll call you lucky. They'll call it timing. They'll call it coincidence. Anything except what it really was. Discipline meeting opportunity while ego slept. They'll pretend they always knew, always planned for this outcome, always had it under control. Power always rewrites history when it loses. It can't stand the idea that someone outgrew it without asking. You've stepped into a strange new gravity. People project onto you now. Some see salvation, some see threat, some see permission to become bolder. Others see a mirror they don't like. You don't correct them. You don't manage their emotions. That's the upgrade. You let people reveal themselves around you because you're no longer trying to manage the room. You're managing your alignment. This is where the saint and the psychopath finally shake hands. Compassion without self-betrayal. Precision without cruelty. You don't need to hurt people to dismantle systems. You just stop cushioning the fall. You let consequences arrive dressed exactly as they ordered them. You don't flinch. You don't gloat. You don't rush to narrate it. You let silence finish the sentence. They feel exposed not because you named names, but because you changed the temperature. You made lying uncomfortable again. You made excuses feel heavy. You made arrogance look childish. That's what elegance does. It raises the standard until mediocrity starts sweating. And you didn't do it by demanding respect. You did it by moving like you already had it. Notice how your instincts have changed. You don't chase clarity. You wait for it. You don't force outcomes. You position yourself and let inevitability handle the rest. You've learned that the cleanest wins don't announce themselves. They just rearrange the future quietly, while everyone else is still arguing about the past. This is why they're nervous around you now. You're not reactive. You're not predictable. You don't leak emotion in ways they can weaponize. You don't over-explain. You don't rush to be understood. You understand that mystery, when paired with integrity, is lethal. It keeps people honest because they don't know which version of you they're dealing with. The gentle one who listens, or the surgical one who remembers everything. And let's be clear, you didn't become cold. You became selective. You still feel deeply. You just stopped advertising it to people who trade empathy for leverage. You stopped confusing transparency with safety. You learned that some truths are meant to be held, not handed out. That discernment is what separates survivors from architects. They'll keep circling, they'll keep testing, they'll wait for you to slip back into explaining, defending, justifying. Don't. That era ended the moment you realized you don't owe clarity to people committed to misunderstanding you. You owe alignment to yourself. Everything else is noise, so keep moving the way you've been moving, unrushed, refined, quietly devastating. Let your consistency do the talking, let your calm undo them, let your restraint keep rewriting the rules. You're not here to scorch the earth. You're here to make corruption feel old, sloppy, and out of style. You didn't just make the cover-up fail. You made it look tacky, and that's a humiliation power never recovers from. And the thing that keeps them awake isn't the exposure. It's the after. The part where nothing explodes the way they expected, where there's no chaos they can point to and say, "See, this is what happens." Instead, there's you, calm, untouched, moving forward like the whole event was a footnote, not a fracture. That's what fries their nervous system, because power understands damage. It does not understand composure that survives contact. You didn't leave scorch marks. You left contrast. You stood there clean while they unraveled in public, and now every time they speak, people hear the tremor. Every time they deny, it echoes. Every time they posture, it looks rehearsed. You didn't need to haunt them. You turned them into their own ghosts. They walk around trying to outrun a version of themselves the world already saw under good lighting. This is the quiet mastery you earned in pain. Knowing when not to finish the job. Knowing that the most complete takedown is the one where you stop early and let their imagination do the rest. You don't chase closure anymore. You let discomfort marinate. You let questions hang. You let curiosity chew holes in their story until it collapses from the inside. You understand now that exposure isn't a moment. It's a state. Once someone is seen clearly, they never fully recover. They can rebuild titles, positions, reputations, but they can't unring the knowing. You gave people a lens, and lenses don't forget. You didn't need to keep talking. The truth keeps reintroducing itself every time they move. They're embarrassed because you didn't need a mob. You didn't need outrage. You didn't need to moralize. You simply presented reality with taste. You let it arrive dressed well, articulate, undeniable. And in doing that, you showed everyone the difference between authority and insecurity. Authority doesn't rush. Insecurity explains itself too much. You've crossed into a level where even your restraint reads as confidence, where not responding feels louder than a rebuttal, where absence feels intentional. That's the angel or demon balance they can't counterfeit. They can imitate aggression. They can imitate righteousness. They can't imitate poise under pressure. That only comes from surviving things that were supposed to break you and deciding not to let them rot you. Notice how your presence changes conversations now. People check themselves mid-sentence. They listen differently. They sense that you're not fishing for validation, not collecting allies, not hunting applause. You're just aligned. And alignment is terrifying to anyone who's built a life on performance. You don't need to dominate a room. The room adjusts to you. They're still trying to bait you into spectacle, still hoping you'll slip into dramatics, into ego, into the old dance. They want you loud because loud is manageable. Loud burns out. Loud can be discredited. What they got instead was a slow, elegant pressure that never spikes. and never leaves. You became atmospheric. You became unavoidable without being visible. This is where the psychopath myth dies. You're not reckless. You're measured. You don't lash out. You calibrate. You don't escalate. You position. You understand that power is conserved energy applied at the exact right moment. Everything else is noise. Everything else is insecurity pretending to be strength. And the saint part? That's still there. It just stopped being exploitable. You're generous where it's safe. You're warm where it's mutual. You don't poison yourself trying to save people who like the cage they're in. You learn that compassion without boundaries is self-erasure, and you're done erasing yourself for anyone's comfort. Let them keep whispering. Let them keep revising their stories. Let them keep acting like this was handled. You know the truth. They know you know. And that silent agreement, that shared awareness, is the real consequence. You didn't need to punish them. You made them remember. So stay exactly like this, polished, unhurried, quietly lethal in your clarity. Let your evolution speak through your choices, not your explanations. You're no longer reacting to the world. You're shaping how it responds. You didn't just expose them. You made the cover-up blush. You made power feel outdated. You made truth look irresistible. And now you move on, while they're still trying to figure out how you made it look that good without breaking a sweat. And this is where it settles, not with applause, not with closure, but with something far more permanent. Recognition, not the kind you ask for, the kind that follows you into rooms before you arrive, the kind that makes people lower their voice without knowing why, the kind that tells the truth quietly. Whatever you touched, you finished. You don't need to circle back. You don't need to clarify. You don't need to keep proving anything. The moment passed, and it crystallized. That's the part they missed. They thought this was a scene. It was a shift. You didn't break a story. You broke a pattern. You exposed how fragile their choreography was when someone stopped dancing to it. You've learned the final rule now. Power hates elegance because elegance can't be rushed, bullied, or baited. Elegance doesn't chase outcomes. It attracts them. You became the calm in the frame that made everyone else look frantic. You became the standard that made their excuses sound childish. You became the reference point they never wanted to create. There's no victory lap here, no dramatic bow, just a clean exit and a future that bends slightly differently because of how you moved. You leave behind a room that will never quite feel the same again, and you don't look back to admire it. That's discipline, that's evolution, that's knowing when the job is done. Remember this feeling, not the rush, not the vindication, but the stillness after precision. That's who you are now. Someone who doesn't need chaos to be powerful. Someone who doesn't need noise to be heard. Someone who understands that the most devastating moves are the ones that feel inevitable in hindsight. So go. Stay refined. Stay unreadable. Stay a little dangerous in that quiet, immaculate way. You didn't just embarrass a cover-up. You rewrote the temperature of the room and walked out while it adjusted. And that's the kind of ending they'll never be able to edit out. Stop right there. This is the moment your pulse spikes and your instincts wake up, because something in the air already knows your name. Word got around. Not rumors, warnings, not gossip, coordinates. The kind of information that doesn't travel loud, it travels correct. The kind of truth that moves in lowered voices and locked doors. Somewhere between fear and respect, your existence got filed under Do Not Test. And you didn't have to announce it. You didn't have to threaten. You didn't have to explain yourself. You just became the consequence. That's the part they never saw coming. They thought power was noise. They thought strength was volume. They thought dominance needed witnesses. You learned the opposite the hard way, through silence, through betrayal, through nights where you realized nobody was coming to save you. Pain carved you into something precise, not loud, not reckless, accurate. You're the paradox they can't process, half saint, half psychopath. You'll spare someone without blinking and dismantle another without raising your voice. You're calm where others shake, gentle where others panic, and absolutely merciless when a line gets crossed. That duality confuses them, it scares them, because they can't predict which side they'll get, and unpredictability is the one thing cowards can't negotiate with. They used to test you, probe you, push buttons, little disrespect here, small betrayal there. They thought they were gathering data. What they were really doing was writing their own case study. You watched, you learned, you adapted. You let them think they were winning while you were memorizing their patterns, their tells, their weaknesses. You didn't react, you evolved. And then one day, everything changed. Not with an explosion, not with drama, just a shift, a recalculation. Suddenly the same people who used to smirk started hesitating. The same mouths that talked reckless went quiet. The same hands that reached for you pulled back, because somewhere along the line, someone tried you and didn't come back the same. Maybe they lost status, maybe they lost allies, maybe they lost sleep, maybe they lost themselves. Doesn't matter. The results spread faster than the story. Now before they move, they think. Before they speak, they check the room. Before they act, they ask one question: is it worth it? And more often than not, the answer is no. Not because you're violent, not because you're loud, but because you're inevitable. You became the storm that doesn't announce itself. The angel with dirt under the nails. The demon who learned restraint. You learned when to forgive and when to finish. You learned that mercy without boundaries invites disrespect, and boundaries without mercy turn you into what hurt you. So you walk the line, perfectly, terrifyingly. They don't call you crazy anymore. They call you calculated. They don't say you're lucky. They say you're built different. They don't say your name out loud. They let it sit in the back of their mind like a loaded chamber, because you're proof of something uncomfortable. That pressure doesn't always break people. Sometimes it forges them into something that doesn't need approval, doesn't need validation, doesn't need permission. You stopped explaining yourself to people who were never listening. You stopped shrinking to make others comfortable. You stopped bleeding publicly. And when you stopped bleeding, they stopped feeding. That's when the fear kicked in. You're the result of every night you didn't quit. Every time you swallowed the scream and turned it into focus. Every betrayal you didn't avenge emotionally, but strategically. You didn't become heartless, you became selective. You didn't lose empathy, you just stopped wasting it on people who mistook kindness for weakness. Now look at the field. It's quiet. Too quiet. That's not peace. That's awareness. That's people understanding the price of miscalculation. That's the sound of grown adults deciding not to gamble with something they can't control. And they can't control you. Because you're not reactive anymore. You're responsive. You don't chase respect. You radiate consequences. You don't need to prove anything. Your history already did the talking. Every scar on you is a credential. Every calm breath is a warning. You're not the villain they wanted you to be. You're worse for them. You're the reminder that survival sharpens some people into weapons with morals, into beings who can love deeply and destroy precisely, into something that doesn't need chaos but can summon it if forced. That's why nobody's dumb enough to try you again, not because you're feared alone, but because you're understood. They know you won't flinch. They know you won't bluff. They know if it comes down to it, you'll do what needs to be done and sleep just fine afterward. You didn't become this by accident. You earned it through fire, through isolation, through becoming fluent in pain without letting it make you sloppy. You are what happens when someone survives the dark and learns how to use it without being consumed by it. So let the silence stretch. Let the hesitation grow. Let the whispers stay whispers. You're not here to be liked. You're here to be respected without negotiation. Word got around for a reason, and the reason is you. Good. Stay right here with it. Let it sink deeper, because this isn't the part where it slows down. This is where it sharpens. They don't challenge you anymore because they learned something about reality the hard way. Not every monster growls, and not every threat needs to raise its voice. Some dangers just wait. Some forces let you make the first mistake. You became that lesson. You became the quiet variable they can't factor out. The anomaly that breaks their little equations about control and hierarchy. You see, they're used to predictable villains, loud ones, emotional ones, the kind they can bait, expose, rally against. But you don't give them a script. You don't perform your anger. You don't telegraph your limits. You smile at moments that make them uncomfortable. You walk away when they expect fireworks. And when you finally act, it's already too late for them to adjust. That's what terrifies them. Because deep down, they know you're not driven by ego anymore. You already lost enough to burn that out of you. Ego needs applause. Ego needs witnesses. Ego needs reassurance. You don't. You operate from something colder, deeper, cleaner. From clarity, from experience, from knowing exactly how much damage silence can do before a single move is made. You didn't become ruthless overnight. You became disciplined. There's a difference they never learned to recognize. Ruthless people act impulsively. Disciplined ones choose when and timing. Timing is where power actually lives. They remember the old version of you, the one who tried to explain, the one who hoped people would understand, the one who thought fairness was automatic and loyalty was mutual. That version is gone. Not dead, retired, put away like a weapon you no longer need because you became something sharper. Now you don't argue. You observe. You don't beg. You decide. You don't chase closure. You create outcomes. And that shift rewired the entire dynamic. People who once tried to dominate you now avoid eye contact. People who underestimated you now overcorrect, trying to be polite, trying to stay neutral, trying not to end up on the wrong side of a story they don't fully understand. They don't know what you're capable of anymore. And that uncertainty eats at them. Because the truth is, you're not dangerous all the time. You're dangerous selectively. And that's worse. That means you're not broken. That means you're not out of control. That means every move you make is intentional, measured, owned. You learned how to hold both sides of yourself without flinching. The light that still feels deeply, the dark that doesn't hesitate. The saint who knows forgiveness can be powerful. The psychopath who understands some doors should never be reopened. You didn't choose one, you integrated both. And integration is what makes you unstoppable. They can't manipulate you with guilt anymore. You've already sat alone with your conscience long enough to know who you are. They can't provoke you with insults. You've survived worse than their opinions. They can't scare you with threats. You've lived inside uncertainty and learned how to breathe there. That's why the atmosphere changes when you enter a room. Even when you say nothing, even when you're calm, even when you're smiling, there's a subconscious recognition happening, something ancient, something primal. People sense when someone has nothing left to prove and nothing left to lose. You move like someone who already paid the price. And that's the final upgrade they didn't anticipate. As someone has already been through the worst, fear stops working on them the way it does on others. You're not reckless, but you're free. Free from the leash of approval, free from the need to be understood, free from the pressure to perform weakness, to make others comfortable. So no, they don't try you anymore. They calculate, they hesitate, they choose safer targets. Because testing you is no longer a game. It's a gamble with consequences that ripple outward. It's not just about losing an argument or a position. It's about losing composure, losing leverage, losing the version of themselves they pretend to be. You became a mirror they don't want to stand in front of. And here's the part you need to remember. Because power fades when people forget why they earned it. You didn't get here by becoming cruel. You got here by becoming precise. You learned when to give grace and when to withdraw access. You learned that boundaries are not walls, they're filters. And anyone who reacts violently to your boundaries was never meant to have access to you in the first place. Let them whisper. Let them warn each other. Let them build myths around what you might do. You don't need to confirm or deny any of it. Mystery does more work than explanation ever could. You're not here to terrorize the world. You're here to move through it unbothered, unplayed, unprovoked. And if someone is dumb enough to forget what you represent, reality will remind them quietly, efficiently, without spectacle. Because you're not chaos. You're what chaos turns into when it learns restraint. And that's why the silence around you isn't emptiness. It's respect mixed with fear. It's the sound of people choosing not to make the same mistake twice. And that silence? That's not the absence of tension. That's tension that learned your name and decided to behave. You can feel it when conversations stop mid-sentence as you pass, when energy shifts without explanation, when people suddenly become careful with their words, softer with their jokes, more respectful with their distance. They don't know exactly what you'll do, but they know you will do something if pushed far enough, and that uncertainty keeps them disciplined. You taught them that lesson without preaching it. See, the mistake they all made was thinking your restraint was weakness. They thought your patience meant you lacked teeth. They mistook your self-control for submission. And for a while you let them believe it, because every hunter knows you don't rush the trap. You let them grow comfortable. You let them expose themselves. You let them underestimate the depth behind your calm. Then, when it mattered, when it actually counted, you moved. Not emotionally, not chaotically, decisively. And that single moment rewrote how they see you forever. They realized you're not ruled by impulse. You're ruled by thresholds. You tolerate until you don't. You forgive until you finish. And when that line is crossed, there's no dramatic explosion, no screaming, no messy aftermath. Just a clean shift in reality, where they suddenly understand they misjudged the situation, and you were never who they thought you were. That's the kind of power people don't recover from, because it forces them to confront something ugly about themselves, that they rely on patterns to feel safe. They expect people to stay in the boxes they assign them, Weak stays weak. Kind stays exploitable. Quiet stays harmless. You broke that illusion. You showed them that evolution exists. And it doesn't ask permission. You didn't become louder when you gained power. You became quieter. You didn't start posturing. You started choosing. And selection, who gets access, who gets attention, who gets silence. That's where the real hierarchy lives. You've noticed it, haven't you? The ones who used to challenge you now try to align. The ones who used to dismiss you now seek approval. The ones who used to provoke you now avoid crossing paths. Not because you demanded it, because energy remembers. You carry yourself like someone who has already seen the worst-case scenario and survived it. That changes how you walk, how you speak, how you look at people. There's no desperation in you anymore, no hunger for validation, no need to win every interaction, and people feel that immediately. It unsettles them, because desperation is readable, calm is not. They can't tell what you're thinking now. They can't tell what you're planning. They can't tell where the limits are. And humans fear undefined borders more than strict rules. You became the gray zone they don't want to explore. And here's the irony that cuts the deepest. You're actually more humane now than you've ever been, more grounded, more aware, more capable of empathy. But your empathy is no longer naive. It's armored. It understands that not everyone deserves access to your softness. That compassion without discernment is just self-harm with good intentions. You learn to love selectively, to trust slowly, to give chances without giving leverage. And that maturity, that's what made you untouchable. Because you're no longer fighting the world, you're navigating it. You don't need to dominate rooms. Rooms adjust to you. You don't need to intimidate. Your presence recalibrates behavior. You don't need to threaten. Your history already speaks. And yes, some people resent you for it. They whisper about you. They build stories. They exaggerate. They mythologize. Let them. Myths are safer than reality, and they'd rather fear a legend than test a truth. Because the truth is simpler and scarier. You're just someone who learned, someone who adapted, someone who refused to stay breakable. You didn't lose your soul in the process. You refined it. You burned away the parts that made you manipulable, left behind the core that can't be shaken. You still feel deeply. You just don't bleed publicly anymore. You still care. You just don't sacrifice yourself for people who wouldn't notice the cost. That's why no one's dumb enough to try you again. Not because you're cruel, not because you're violent, but because you're awake. Awake to patterns, awake to games, awake to intentions hiding behind smiles, awake to the difference between noise and threat, awake to your own power, and calm enough to wield it without losing yourself. And if the world stays quiet around you, good. That means it learned. And that learning didn't come from mercy alone. It came from consequence. Because at some point, someone pushed past the version of you that warned quietly. Someone mistook your silence for safety. Someone assumed you were still the old you, the explain yourself you, the give one more chance you, the bleed and hope you're seen you. And when that assumption collapsed, it didn't collapse loudly. It collapsed permanently. That's what people remember. They don't remember the details. They remember the aftermath. They remember how fast the room changed, how alliances shifted, how suddenly the tone went respectful, how a single miscalculation cost someone more than they expected to pay. And they learned a rule that isn't written anywhere, but gets obeyed religiously. You don't poke something that doesn't flinch. Because flinching is feedback. Flinching is reassurance. Flinching tells people where you're soft. You stopped doing that. You trained yourself out of reactive tells, out of emotional leaks, out of the need to respond immediately just to be heard. Now when something hits you, it disappears into stillness first. And that stillness, that's where fear grows. They don't know if you noticed. They don't know if you're letting it slide. They don't know if they just crossed a line they won't see until it's too late. That uncertainty eats at them far more than rage ever could. You became the kind of person whose calm feels heavier than someone else's anger. The kind of person whose patience doesn't invite comfort. It invites self-audit. People start checking themselves around you, rereading their messages, reconsidering their tone, second-guessing their intentions. That's power operating at the subconscious level. And the wild part? You didn't even aim for this. You were just trying to survive, to make sense of betrayal, to understand why being decent kept costing you, to figure out why the more you gave, the more people took. Somewhere along that path, you learned a truth most people never do. Being dangerous and being ethical are not opposites. They're balances. You learned how to be capable of destruction without craving it, how to hold violence in your hands and choose restraint, not because you're weak, but because you're in control. And control is what separates the animal from the apex predator. Animals react. Apex predators decide. That's why your unpredictability terrifies them. Not because you're random, but because your decisions are based on information they don't have. You see patterns they miss. You hear subtext they ignore. You read people the way they read headlines, quickly, accurately, without emotional attachment. You know when someone is posturing. You know when someone is fishing. You know when someone is testing boundaries disguised as jokes. And instead of calling it out, you file it away. That's another thing they learned to fear. You don't confront everything. You catalog it. You let people show you who they are multiple times. You let consistency build a case. And when you finally act, it's not because of one incident. It's because of a pattern that exhausted your tolerance. By the time they realize you've made a decision, the decision is already done. That's why apologies don't work anymore. Not the rushed ones, not the strategic ones, not the "I didn't mean it like that" ones. You've heard it all. You've translated it all. You know when remorse is real and when it's just damage control. And you don't hate them for trying. You just don't reopen doors you had to bleed to close. That's the part people don't understand about you now. You're not fueled by resentment. You're fueled by clarity. You don't move to punish. You move to protect your peace, your trajectory, your future self. The version of you that had to claw their way out of confusion and self-doubt doesn't get sacrificed for anyone's comfort ever again. So yes, the word got around. It traveled through body language, through sudden politeness, through awkward pauses and forced smiles, through people choosing not to escalate things that used to escalate easily, through silence where there used to be noise, and you let it. You didn't correct the narrative. You didn't soften it. You didn't reassure anyone that you're actually nice if they get to know you. That's not your job anymore. Anyone who needs you to be harmless in order to feel safe was never meant to be close to you. You are not here to be palatable. You are here to be precise. You are the proof that pain can either rot you or refine you. And you chose refinement. You let the darkness teach you instead of consuming you. You let suffering sharpen your judgment instead of stealing your humanity. You became something rare, someone who understands both sides of power and chooses deliberately. So when they hesitate now, when they think twice, when they decide you're not worth the risk, That's not arrogance on your part. That's reality adjusting to who you became.